Good evening, everybody.
I just found the keys to a city. The beats are big and the lights are pretty. So why can't we go to the busy where the dreams are in the sky?
So we want to talk about the news a little bit.
Not so much the news, but an interesting discussion related to the news. There were a couple unfortunate incidents.
Very sad incidents.
Yeah.
One, a college-age woman, Molly Tibbetts, was murdered,
Yeah.
and she was jogging. An illegal alien came, propositioned her. She said no. He couldn't take the rejection, and so
But stabbed her.
stabbed her. And then in Jacksonville, Florida, young man, I think he was about the same age as the manure guy.
Yeah, actually, playing in a Madden tournament, a video game tournament.
Violent video game tournament. That whole sports ball thing.
Came in second place and basically shot the place up.
Huh.
I think 3 people died, including a shooter.
Yeah. So he killed 2 people.
And he was killed.
Committed
eventually.
suicide.
Oh, he committed suicide.
Oh yeah. So both of these incidents were blamed on one thing. And this one thing is toxic masculinity.
Right.
And Alfred thinks I'm entirely arguing semantics here.
I think you are.
Which I might be.
I think you are.
Because I have an issue with the word.
Well, why don't we structure this a little more?
No, let me say what I have
Go ahead.
to say. Let me say, I have an issue with the word. I think that masculinity by itself is an inherently good word. Now, it's neutral good. It's not solely neutral. It's not solely good. It's neutral to good. So when you label it toxic masculinity, I think by calling it by a word that's neutral good, you are insulting the group that's represented just by masculinity. But at the same time, I think everything that the culture is used to say toxic masculinity is this, as an actual definition, not as there are a lot of people who can't define the term. I think as an actual definition, I think that all of those things are very heinous things. I think that somebody who can't exhibit the strength of character to take rejection, or can't exhibit the virtue of discipline to practice more and come back next year and win, I think those are both heinous things. But I think that as toxic masculinity, it's created an interesting cultural spin that knocks men in society down.
I think toxic masculinity is a perfectly valid, very accurate word to describe a phenomenon that we see. Masculinity, at best, I shouldn't say at best, I think it is very much a neutral term, like femininity. We don't say that with any positive or negative connotation. It's just a collection of attributes that we say a man or a woman has. So masculinity isn't necessarily good or bad. So when you say something like toxic masculinity, you're adding this modifier to it that indicates that we're now talking about the parts of masculinity that are bad. And as we see here, these last recent events have really highlighted, maybe, that there are definitely aspects of masculinity that are negative and that negatively impact people, especially women. I think toxic masculinity comes from a origin of gender studies and the interaction between men and women in our society. And I think to label something toxic masculinity is a pretty accurate way of describing this pretty specific these pretty specific traits, this pretty specific phenomenon where men are either warping traditional masculine values or they're taking traditional masculine values to an unhealthy extreme, and they're then lashing out with aggressive, violent, antisocial behavior towards women, which we saw with the case with Molly Tibbetts,
Well,
or
it's
towards
not.
other men.
Yeah, it's not. None of it's directly towards women.
I think
It-
some of it may be. I think it may be.
I think that it's probably 60% women, 40. Now this is without studying it. I would say that it's.
No, you're right. It is. It can be directed towards women. It can be directed towards
It's-
other men. But I think toxic masculinity as a term does a good job of describing exactly what you and I are agreeing on is a problem and
Yeah.
what needs to be discussed. It's the aspects of masculinity that are an issue, and the men who are doing certain things and acting in a certain way that is, by definition, toxic. And so I feel like toxic masculinity does a good job, and I don't see it as insulting men who do hold traditional virtuous masculine values, because my feeling is, like, if you are a kind of like a good man, you're never going to be in a situation where someone's going to describe you necessarily as like exhibiting toxic masculinity. You're never going to be in a case where you react negatively to rejection or you can't handle failure because, you know, you're a man and you can deal with that.
One might say that's the point of our show.
That is the point of our show.
We want to bring actual masculine values
Yeah,
back.
because lots of people reject me all the time.
Oh,
Lots
yeah.
of women. Yeah, most
I've
of them.
rejected you a few times, but not in that way. Calm down back there. If you thought this was going to turn into a different kind of filming. See, I think that the big thing to note is that masculinity, man, they all are related. And they're all related to virtue because we get all of our language from Latin, basically. There are a couple other things mixed in, but
Well, I mean, if you want to get really technical, English is a Germanic language, which was not derived from Latin, so...
So then how are so many words in America derived from Latin and they have direct Latin links?
Well, it doesn't have anything to do with where our language came from.
Well, okay, so we'll get super technical.
We're not linguists. We don't do that.
But the Latin word for virtue is part of my pronunciation if I get this wrong because I don't speak a dead language. It's virtuoso, I believe. Virtuose or something. It's close to that.
I don't speak Latin either.
But it's
so.
close. It's derived from the word vir, V-I-R. And the word V-I-R, vir, means man. So all those things are related. And then if you do a little bit of digging, to be a true man, and maybe that the issue is that I have an issue with the people who are exhibiting toxic masculinity.
Well, I think you do, because my feeling is you're right. Those people who exhibit toxic masculinity are not what we would consider good men or true men, and that's an issue.
No, because if you look into all of how these words were created, how they became accepted in society, you get to look at people like Thomas Aquinas.
But now we're not even talking about the words. I think you're right in saying.
Hold up on this
Okay.
thought. This is a good one. Because people like Thomas Aquinas, Immanuel Kant, they all talk about the point of man is to overcome natural desires, natural tendencies. Things that... Is it safe to say that evolution is a thing?
Yes, I think so.
We've
come to that point.
We're not touching flat world conspiracies here. So, if evolution is a thing, we all come from animals.
Yes.
So, it's safe to say that every human has natural tendencies to natural inclinations, and some of those basic inclinations for animals are to...
Or incorrect, or
are not
compatible with our society today.
Virtuous and morally superior. Right. They are basic instincts like what my dog here that I'm resting my foot on that you might not be able to see. He's sleeping. He slept all day. So laziness is a natural instinct.
Oh, come on. Timber's old. He can sleep all day.
Yeah,
He's not lazy.
it's okay. But laziness is a natural instinct because if you're lazy, you're conserving more energy.
That's true. Yeah.
Breeding is a predominant male instinct, so it doesn't matter if someone says yes or no to an animal.
Yeah.
And
Those are all good
being
points.
the dominant in the pack, whether you have to kill someone or not, is things animals do. But it's humans who have become virtuous, who have, through societally listened to some of the teaching of philosophers of days of old, we have moved to having higher morals and attempting to overcome our animal instincts. And that is the whole arguable point of being a true man, being a masculine
Yeah, being
man.
able to be rational and understanding and moral.
And one of the big arguments that I've seen against toxic masculinity is a man in someone's life telling you should like cars, or that's
But,
so gay.
no, I think the thing there is it's telling a little boy that if he doesn't like cars, there's something wrong with him. Because that's the thing. I think that liking cars is not necessarily manly. You know, you could like cars and be a man, but you could also like anything else. You could be a great painter or an artist. You could be really into reading books, and that is, as long as you uphold the other values, like the kind of core values of like what being a good person, a good man is, that's important. And that's like the whole point of toxic masculinity. Toxic masculinity tries to erase those good parts by saying, like, if you don't follow a certain stereotype, then you're not a man.
But that's cultural. That's not...
But that's what toxic masculinity is.
Masculinity, the whole...
Well, masculinity is cultural.
Of morality and virtue.
But masculinity is cultural.
Is it?
Yeah. Our ideas of masculinity shift with the culture. So, and my feeling is that I just again think that toxic masculinity is a very good way of describing these certain things that are bad, you know? Like telling a little boy that he has to like certain things or else he's not a man or not a boy isn't right. And everybody should be allowed to enjoy what they enjoy and develop their talents, and then, like you said, do that in a moral kind of like way, civilized way where they are trying to better themselves. And that's kind of what this comes down to, I think.
I think a part of the issue is that culturally we have shifted away from what is truly masculine. And
Maybe.
We have focused on traits. We have focused on traits. And culturally we are focusing on traits typically associated with male gender roles.
Now, it's interesting you say that because I actually think it's the opposite. I think if we go back decades and decades, we start to see that people kind of do that very thing. They associate if you don't have these very specific set of traits, you're not a man. And we're now becoming aware of the fact that there's a separation between the stereotype and actually being a man, which is why we're in a really good position now, because we can sit back and discuss this and say, hey, these are the things that are really good, and this is what makes you a man, but these other things, this is just a stereotype,
but when
and
was
it doesn't
Thomas
matter.
Aquinas alive?
Well, Thomas Aquinas is different. Thomas Aquinas wasn't necessarily... When Thomas Aquinas was talking about man, Thomas Aquinas was talking about humanity.
Well, he was, but him and Immanuel Kant both wrote a little bit specifically on males.
They did.
And they were talking on how I think the big thing that we need to focus on in society is to roll back to these old times. Focus on these 7 cardinal virtues, because if you really think about it, if you focus on if you focus on virtues and you realize the importance of virtues as a person, you don't get the issues.
You know, you're right. I think that you do find yourself, like, if you're honestly, if you're a good person and you are a virtuous person, and you can define your virtues in different ways, but I like to think of it as simply being a good person to yourself and to others. You really don't find yourself in a lot of situations where you would be described as toxic, because that's not virtuous, or that's not something that you would want to do to somebody anyway.
I think we have time for one quick description of a virtue.
Okay.
Because as soon as we can, we have a character we are going to be introducing, and he isn't going to make it on the show. I've seen some Snapchats of the position he's in, but his introduction is going to be talking about these virtues, and it's going to be, you'll figure it out. But we're going to give the virtue of strength. Culturally, strength would be, you knocked my drink over. As a man, I should punch you. That's fair. Maybe a little extreme, but fair. Strength is a virtue. Is something entirely different. Strength is a virtue.
Strength is a virtue.
Being physically strong.
Well, it's not just physically strong. You're
it's
right.
being physically,
emotionally,
mentally, and it's the whole point of strength as a virtue is to use your strength to protect others.
Yeah.
And to choose when to use it.
Yeah.
Because you have two options with strength as a virtue: it's strength and cowardice.
Yeah.
Or strength and weakness. And if you're strong, you can defend when it has to. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a fight or flight kind of thing. If you're strong,
I think the virtue of strength is not just fight or flight, but it's when knowing to use it to defend yourself, but also to defend others, and that's what defines strength as a virtue.
Whereas if you don't have strength as a virtue and you have weakness, your only option is to run away. Or hide behind a mask.
You can even say that weakness, you can be physically strong, but still be weak.
Yeah, but it still applies. Because if you aren't mentally strong, and someone tries to sit down and have a discussion like we're having now, you'll run away from that conversation. If you aren't emotionally strong, and someone rejects you, you'll go create walls, you'll create an incident.
Or you'll snap.
And if you aren't physically strong, you can't defend yourself, and you'll run away. It all comes to cowardice.
Yeah.
But
I think this is all an interesting point we're getting to now, because we've been sitting here, and this is probably the fourth time we've rehashed this discussion. So we've had this talk quite a few times.
I think he's rather nice. Then you have him. Oh no, really? I think you ought to give him a chance. He seems kind of helpless.
Helplessness is the last thing I am looking for.
The people